The bus was quiet. Just the hum of the engine, the shuffle of feet, the weight of an old law pressing down on new shoulders. One woman sat, knowing the seat beneath her wasn't just wood and metal, it was a line drawn by history. And when she refused to move, America did. I still remember the silence. It felt like a dare. They expected a day, but they were given 381. 4 days earlier, Rosa Parks said she was tired of giving in, not tired feet. Jobs were on the line. Dignity, too. Danger on every corner. One detail from that morning won't make sense until the verdict lands. To understand why the streets were louder than engines, we need to go back. Have to understand how a bus could carry a city's rules. In Montgomery, the front seats were for white riders. The back was for black riders. If the front filled, a driver could slide the line backward like a ruler on a desk, and you were expected to move with it, stand, even if you'd already paid the same fare. The driver wasn't just a driver, he was the law with a uniform cap. Every ride risked a small cut on the spirit, a nod ignored, a coin demanded at the front, then a step back off the bus to climb through the rear door like contraband. Some drivers pulled off before you made it around. You learned to keep your face steady and your hands quiet. You learned where the line was drawn and how they liked to watch you obey it. Routes became choke points. Mornings smelled like coffee and shoe polish and nerves. The bus steps carried factory shifts, nurses, teachers, aides, cooks, janitors. If you wanted to keep your job, you kept your head down and your fare ready. If you wanted to keep your dignity, you had to decide how much of it you could spare for the ride. Now, long before the headlines, women had been keeping receipts. The Women's Political Council, school teachers, clerks, mothers with a knack for order, kept logs of complaints. Which route, which driver, what words. They wrote letters to the mayor, polite and sharp as a ruler's edge. "Fix this," they said in so many syllables. When nothing changed, they mapped the city in their heads. Who lived where? Who had a phone? Who had a car? Who could print leaflets without waking the baby? Meanwhile, the NAACP didn't sleep. The local branch filed, documented, and visited living rooms where the air hummed with the same question. Where do we make our stand? Rosa Parks, everybody remembers the seat. Fewer remember the years, served as secretary. She took statements from folks who'd been pushed, insulted, arrested. She'd trained at Highlander, learned how to hold steady when the temperature in the room rose. Quiet isn't the same as passive. Quiet can be practice. Here's a name that deserves the front row: Claudette Colvin. Teenager. Months before Rosa Parks, she refused to give up her seat. Brave and brilliant, and the police hauled her off anyway. Movement leaders hesitated. Strategy matters. Optics, timing, the weight. They knew the city would try to dump on a young girl's shoulders. It wasn't fair. It was calculus. And it burned. The strangest part, the city depended on the riders it tried to humiliate. Black ridership made up the majority of the fares. The whole machine ran on the very people it ordered to the back. The leverage sat there in plain sight, clanking along on steel rims, pretending to be normal. If you think about it, civilization was always rebooting itself at the bus stop. I still remember the way a driver's eyes could flatten a person. You step on, the coin drops, the seat sits there like a trap, and you feel the old rule sitting in your lap before you ever touch the cushion. People learned survival tricks. Ride earlier, ride later, sit near a window, no eye contact. Humor helped. If they pushed the line any farther back, someone said to me once, "We'll be riding the bumper." We laughed because sometimes you have to. Behind those small tactics, the women were building something bigger. Phone lists copied and recopied. Church basements hosting quiet meetings where somebody's casserole kept morale up. A mimeograph machine humming like a hive, ink on fingertips like blue tattoos. The WPC didn't announce themselves with trumpets. They ran the switchboards. They planned who would call whom when it was time. And the time, everyone sensed, was coming. Each complaint stacked on the last like kindling under a damp log. one spark, and it would finally catch. We didn't know which day, only that the day would look ordinary right up until it didn't. What nobody says enough is how the rules bred 1,000 daily negotiations. A mother sitting with a child who'd fallen asleep on her shoulder. A soldier home on leave in a stiff uniform staring hard at his hands. A nurse, after a night shift counting stops like prayers. People making small trades with themselves just to get to Tuesday. And all of it told them the same story. You can move the line whenever you want, but we have to move with it. Meanwhile, the budget men at the bus company watched ridership numbers like weather reports. They knew where the money came from. They also knew who ran City Hall. That's the irony that hummed under everything. The system was built on the backs of people it kept telling to sit down. Then came one ordinary ride that refused to be ordinary. End of day, December 1st, 1955. A woman who knew the rules like everyone else also knew the cost of obeying them. Tired of giving in, that's how she framed it. Not a sore back, but a line she wouldn't cross anymore. The driver barked, the bus swayed, feet shuffled, and she stayed. In that stillness, the entire city's choreography hiccuped. If you're wondering how a single seat could hold so much weight, remember the ledger beneath it. Years of letters, names in notebooks, a phone tree ready to bloom overnight, and a community that had quietly measured its own power. The bus carried more than passengers. It carried a fuse. And that day, it finally met a match. End of day, December 1st. You know that heavy air a bus gets when folks have given the best of their patience to the clock and the boss? That's the air Rosa walked into. She paid her fare, stepped down to re-enter at the rear like the rule demanded, and took a seat in the colored section, the kind of compromise you make 100 times without calling it that. Then the bus filled. The line slid. The driver, James Blake, wanted that row cleared so a white man wouldn't have to stand. The shuffle started. It always starts the same. Eyes averted, knees brushing. The quiet apology of bodies, making room for someone else's comfort. Rosa didn't make room. She moved her purse, not her body. Small motion, huge meaning. She looked steady, not hostile. You ever feel a room change temperature without the thermostat moving? That's what happened inside that bus. The driver barked his order again, formal, then louder. She said, as even as a plumb line, "I don't think I should have to stand." Not a speech, a sentence that weighed more than the bus. I'd seen that driver before. I knew that tone. People always tell you to keep your head down, but sometimes the ground isn't where you need to look. Rosa kept her eyes level. The other riders read the air the way sailors read the sky. Some slid out of their seats, some froze. One woman's hand tightened around a brown paper bag like it might hold back history. The driver threatened to call the police. Rosa said, "You may do that." Simple as closing a book. He left the wheel to find an officer. The bus idled, humming like it knew trouble when it felt it. Outside, late lights smeared the street. Inside, you could hear breathing. Now, folks later tried to shrink it to tired feet. But Rosa had been tired longer than an afternoon. She'd been taking statements for years, training her spine to hold its shape under heat. That's the difference between fatigue and decision. Fatigue asks for a chair. Decision becomes one. The police boarded, and the bus leaned quieter. They asked their questions. She answered, calm. They arrested her under the city ordinance. When they let her off, some riders looked at their shoes as if guilt had scuffed them. The door folded like a mouth shutting on a truth it couldn't swallow. Here's where the room that wasn't a room sprang awake. The Women's Political Council had been waiting for a spark. Joanne Robinson saw it and moved fast. Late night, she and a small crew ran a mimeograph machine until the ink bled blue snow across the floor. "Don't ride the buses on Monday," the leaflet said. "Clear, clean orders." The phone tree lit up. Teachers calling parents, parents calling cousins, cousins calling church friends. You want to see logistics? Watch a city organize itself in pajamas. I got one of those calls. Voice low, urgent, like talking through a keyhole. "We're walking Monday." Shoes set by doors across the west side. hats blocked, lunch pails packed, black-owned taxis ready to charge 10 cents, the bus fare, because sometimes solidarity comes with a meter and a wink. Meanwhile, Rosa's court date landed like a drumbeat, December 5th. Every hour brought more whispers turning into plans. Ministers opened sanctuaries, dispatched centers with stained glass. Deacons drew up driver lists on church bulletins. Somebody's uncle volunteered a Chevy. Somebody's aunt promised sandwiches. We weren't building a protest. We were building a transportation system with hymns for schedules. And the city? It expected a flicker that would burn out by lunch. They didn't understand how long we'd been collecting kindling. They didn't understand that a quiet woman's no could sound like a bell. When Monday came, the buses would meet their match. But that night, in kitchens and basements, we met ourselves. Steady hands, quick minds, tired feet that didn't feel tired anymore. Rosa's refusal didn't just light a fuse. It showed us where to aim the fire. Dawn came in layers, gray first, then a thin gold that made the sidewalks look like they'd been polished for church. I stepped out and listened. No air brakes sighing, no diesel cough, just the creak of porches and the rhythm of shoes meeting pavement. It felt like the city had changed its heartbeat overnight. At bus stops, benches sat empty like props from a play nobody showed up to. But a block over, the churchyards were crowded. Women in coats holding thermoses, men with caps pulled low, kids tugging at lunch pails like they were in on a secret. We gathered under stained glass and hand-lettered signs. Dispatch, North Route, Hospital Run. If you wanted to see order born from faith, you should have seen those chalkboards. Carpools moved like a living diagram. Deacons stood at folding tables, pencils behind ears, matching names to rides. 2 for Day Street, 3 for the base, 1 overnight nurse. Urgent. Drivers lined up like saints of the internal combustion engine. You'd hear a deacon call, "Alberta, you're on the clerk line," and watch a sedan fill in seconds. We weren't improvising. We were executing a plan we'd built in whispers. Black-owned taxis rolled slow, headlights winking, 10 cents a ride, the bus fare, meters clicking like they were keeping time with the choir. Drivers leaned out with a half smile that said, "Climb in, we've got you." City officials tried to threaten them, but money has a memory, and those drivers remembered who kept their lights on. Meanwhile, folks walked, some for blocks, some for miles. A woman next to me hitched her grocery bag higher and said, "My granddaddy walked through worse for less." By 8, the test came. Clouds pulled tight like someone was reconsidering the weather. A drizzle began, delicate as doubt. Supervisors waited at factory gates, arms folded, watches tapped. You could see the calculation on their faces. Who'd brake? Who'd slide onto a bus just this once? And then, no one did. Umbrellas bloomed like stubborn flowers. Jackets darkened. We kept moving. A man with a cardboard hat, it was all he had, laughed at himself and said, "Fashion's temporary, dignity's permanent." Mid-morning, word spread back through the dispatch centers like a wave breaking good news. The buses were running empty. Drivers sat with their hands on wheels, engines idling to nothing. Some routes didn't carry 5 riders all morning. It wasn't just protest. It was absence made loud enough to hear from City Hall. Inside Holt Street Baptist, the phone rang so often, the receiver felt warm in your hand. Calls from teachers, nurses, cooks. "I'm at work, on time." Calls from elders, "Save a seat for my neighbor on the 3 o'clock. The women on the switchboards were conductors of a symphony nobody printed sheet music for. They assigned, reassigned, calmed frayed nerves, and reminded folks to eat. I watched Joanne Robinson pass a plate of sandwiches like it was a second communion. Late morning brought the first friction. Police cruisers shadowed the carpools looking for illegal jitney operations to ticket. A deacon in a wool coat stepped out, Bible in one hand, clipboard in the other, and asked for the ordinance number. Calm as a banker, They wrote him up anyway. He smiled, tucked the paper under his arm, and kept loading riders. That tiny grin said, "Your ink isn't thicker than our resolve." At lunch, I walked alongside a janitor who'd turned down 3 rides to save gas for a family with a newborn. He said, "Floor's cleaner when you mop it slow." I didn't quite get it until I saw the shine he was talking about. Street by street, the city reflecting different faces than it was used to seeing at noon. Afternoon, the rumors began. Buses would cut service to force people back. Bosses would fire late workers. The city would arrest drivers by the dozen. Some of it happened. Some didn't. What mattered was the response. Each threat met by another adjustment. A garage on the west side opened as a repair shop for tired cars. A barber volunteered his back room for spare tires. A teacher wrote out new ride lists in neat rows you could have graded with an A. By sundown, we had numbers in our bones, even if we didn't have them on paper. You felt the scale in your feet. Church after church filled for the first mass meeting, hats in hands, babies drowsing on shoulders. The air had that packed, expectant warmth of a revival, but the sermon was logistics with a drumbeat. The Montgomery Improvement Association took shape at a wooden podium. Names were called, votes taken. And then a calm voice stepped up, young pastor, steady spine, cadence that could hold a room without squeezing it. Martin's name was known by some, but his presence, that traveled fast. He talked about nonviolence like it was a muscle we were going to work, about walking as prayer with blisters. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The crowd answered with the kind of sound that tightens your chest, the sound of people deciding who they are. Pledges were taken, not just for tomorrow, for as long as it took. On the way out, I passed a bus easing by, mostly empty, its lights reflecting in rain puddles like it was searching for itself. I couldn't help a small, tired grin. They expected a day. We'd given them a map, a schedule, and a promise. Day 1 wasn't the fire, it was the firewall, and the city felt the heat. After the first roar, you learned to live at a steady volume. Day 2 looked like day 1, only tighter. Lunch pails by doors, church vans rattling like loyal old dogs. The dispatch chalkboards got neater. We stopped asking if we could do it and started asking where the next flat tire was. Morning walks turned into rituals. You'd see the same nurse before dawn, coat buttoned up to her chin, eyes soft but awake. She measured her route by porch lights. A mile in, she'd switch hands with her thermos like it was a baton. In a relay, none of us wanted to drop. She never did. At the hospital, she'd pat her shoes dry with paper towels and start a shift like it was any other Tuesday. Not every day smiled back. Police cruised the carpools, wrote tickets so fast the ink probably needed a rest. Drivers learned to keep toolkits in their trunks, spare fan belts, a can of gas, jumper cables that looked like metal snakes. We ran a rolling repair shop. Deacons with grease on their sleeves stood beside choir mothers who ran check-in tables like drill sergeants with better manners. Humor helped. A driver got pulled over for stopping too long at a corner. He told the officer, "I'm practicing patience." The ticket didn't laugh. He did anyway. On porches, tempers rose and cooled. When someone's voice climbed, a neighbor would sit them down with a glass of sweet tea and a reading from the MIA's nonviolence pledge. We weren't saints. We practiced. Logistics scaled like bread dough in summer. Phone captains took evening turns. North side, east side, hospital circuit, base shift change. We penciled routes on butcher paper and taped them across fellowship hall walls. If a car broke down, a bell rang, literally a little brass bell, and within minutes, a replacement pulled up. A dentist's Buick did double duty, mornings, molars, afternoons, mechanics runs. When the city tried to penalize taxis for charging 10 cents, we raised money to pay fines. Coins jingled in offering plates with the solemnity of a mortgage. The bus company's books started groaning. You could hear it in the way city officials talked. New words like service adjustments, like the routes were picky eaters. Winter came, and with it, a sharp cold that made metal sting. The buses still rolled mostly empty. Our riders bundled tight and kept walking. Church basements smelled like coffee and wool. Across a city map, our routes traced a second Montgomery, one built on trust and cranky engines and good shoes. Threats weren't theoretical. Carpool drivers got arrested. Folks were harassed curbside. I watched a teenager get cuffed for illegal pickup while his grandmother cried into a hanky with flowers stitched in. We showed up at the station in our Sunday coats on a Thursday and signed papers with steady hands. The charges didn't stick, the memory did. White allies slipped into the gears where they could. A professor lent his station wagon and his quiet. A shop owner stashed spare parts in a storeroom no inspector seemed to find. And then there were those who shouted from porches as we passed, words meant to sting. Some did, but the work of the day waited at the next corner, and that pulled us forward. Women were the backbone that never asked for attention. Switchboards lit up like constellations. The WPC ran call times so smoothly you'd think they were scheduling trains. Joanne and the teachers balanced discipline with warmth. "You're late to your route," she'd say, "and I saved you a sandwich." The moral weather of the room stayed clear because they kept it that way. Notes pinned where men would lose them, lists rewritten when ink smudged, minutes taken when tempers ran too fast. Micro moments told the story better than any headline. A janitor waved off a ride, saved the gas for the young, and trudged on, humming. A schoolboy carried his mother's lunch because her hands were chapped raw, then skipped the last block because he was still a kid. A deacon's old Plymouth coughed to a stop. 3 men in ties pushed it to the curb and made jokes about pushing sermons uphill. Every night, the MIA meetings reset our compass. We reviewed incidents like teachers going over homework, who was followed, who was fined, who needed a tire. Then came the discipline drill. Nonviolence isn't a word. It's muscle memory. "We'll be tempted," Martin would say, calm and firm. "We'll be tested." The room breathed in. "We will stay the course." It wasn't magic. It was repetition until conviction felt like routine. Money ran thin, shoes thinner. We held rallies to buy loafers and retread tires. I watched a seamstress slip a folded dollar into a basket like she was feeding a flame. The bus company cut routes. We shifted carpools. The city tried injunctions. Lawyers answered with briefcases and worn eyes. The pattern turned almost elegant. They pressed, we flexed. They tightened, we flowed around. By spring, you could feel a rhythm settle. The boycott wasn't a stunt anymore, it was a system. Kids learned which cars smelled like peppermint, which drivers played the radio low, which routes were best for catching a few extra minutes of homework. Even the dogs on certain corners learned to lift their heads the moment a carpool slowed. People asked me later how we did it that long. The truth is, we didn't do it that long. We did it in mornings and noons and nights. We did it in cracked heels and patched hoses. We did it with a laugh here and a hymn there and 1,000 tiny courtesies. The city looked the same from the outside. Inside, the gears had shifted. Meanwhile, another front was opening where shoes couldn't reach. The courthouse steps began to feel our weight too. And while the papers shuffled in tall stacks, the streets kept their promise, one ride at a time, one foot in front of the other, until resolve felt as ordinary as breathing. While the streets found their rhythm, the lawyers sharpened their pencils. We loved Rosa, but the smart move wasn't to hang everything on one arrest that could get tangled in city court. The strategy shifted. Build a federal case that aimed straight at the Constitution, not a traffic stop with old paint on it. You have to understand, this wasn't one person's burden anymore. Aurelia Browder, Susie McDonald, Claudette Colvin, and Mary Louise Smith, women with bus stories etched into muscle memory, became plaintiffs. Rosa supported it, but the suit carried multiple voices, which made the song harder to ignore. The question wasn't, was a driver rude? It was, can a city carve a bus into 2 different countries and call it order? Meetings got quieter, more careful. Paper slid across tables like playing cards you didn't want the dealer to see. The NAACP legal team, with local attorneys shoulder to shoulder, drafted a case that said equal protection isn't a theory, it's a seat. Either you have it or you don't. We were still walking, still hauling lunch pails and patching fan belts, while briefs fattened in manila folders. June 1956, the federal bench spoke. A 3-judge panel ruled that bus segregation violated the 14th Amendment. The words weren't poetic, but to us, they sounded like a hymn. I was in a fellowship hall when the first call came through. Someone covered the mouthpiece and whispered, "We won." It tasted like sweet tea and hope. Now the city didn't fold. Appeals began like a clock you wish you could unplug. Officials used every page in the playbook, delay, deflect, declare community standards. The bus company clung to the old line like it was a lifeline, not a noose. Meanwhile, the boycott moved in tempo with court filings and Sunday sermons. Martin would stand up, voice steady, and translate legalese into resolve. We are patient because freedom takes patience. Those months stretched. A ruling is ink, meaning needs footsteps, so we kept walking. Phones still rang, tires still wore thin, threats still came by mail and midnight knock, but we had another beat to count. Filings, responses, arguments. You could feel the movement breathing, inhale on court days, exhale on carpools. I remember one night, radio on the counter, coffee going colder than it had any right to. The announcer's voice circled the news like a bird finding a perch. We leaned in, me, 2 neighbors, a stack of route lists, waiting for a sentence that would let our shoulders drop. "Not yet," the voice said. Another delay. We refilled cups and reset our jaws. Then November brought the echo we'd been climbing toward. The Supreme Court let the lower court's decision stand. No fanfare, just a refusal to turn back the clock. That quiet from Washington rang louder than any bus engine we'd ever heard. Somebody in the room said, "That's it." Somebody else said, "Hold steady. Paper travels slow." Both were right. Words spread like heat. Churches hummed. Switchboards clicked. We didn't spike the ball. We checked the locks, because victory without discipline is just a headline. The MIA printed guidance. Ride with dignity. Sit where you choose. Answer curses with calm. Report incidents without fists. Lawyers cautioned, enforcement orders have to land. Pastors cautioned, your character will be tested more fiercely in triumph than in ache. City Hall scrambled for face-saving measures, new rules with old bones, first come, first served, with a wink baked in. We read the lines closely and kept our shoes by the door. The boycott kept breathing, one deliberate day at a time, until the final order hit the desk where it needed to sit. When that last piece of paper arrived, real authority, not rumor, I was again at a kitchen radio. The coffee had learned its lesson. We drank it hot. A neighbor's hand found mine on the table, and we didn't say anything for a long breath. The streets, the switchboards, the sanctuaries, the mechanics' grease, every bit of it had pressed on the same hinge. People ask me why the courtroom mattered if walking worked. Because walking taught us our power, and the court wrote it into law. Because a bus is public, and public either means everybody or it means nothing. Because the women who signed those affidavits carried us past a single story and into the country's promise. Ink met footsteps, and the city was about to see what that sounded like. December light has a different temperature when the paper finally lands. We got the word, not as a shout, but as a steady breath. Ride. I stood at the curb and watched a bus ease up like a dog that had forgotten it used to bite. The door folded open. No directions, no sideways glance from a driver pointing with his chin, just a step and a choice. I took the step. Inside, it felt strange, like walking back into a house after a fire and finding your chair still there. Faces told every possible story. Relief hung on cheekbones. Fury tightened jaws. Curiosity blinked. A white woman clutched her purse so tight the leather creaked. A man in a work jacket stared through me as if the window was on my face. And then a kid grinned because buses were still buses, and wheels make children happy. I sat near the front, not in the first seat, not because I was scared, because I wanted to look around. The air was thin as a high note. Nobody spoke. Even the engine sounded like it was whispering. The driver flicked his eyes to the mirror, took the measure of the room, and drove. We rode with our shoulders down, but our spines tall, the way you do when you practice dignity for a year, and now you get to wear it in public. The MIA had prepared us for this exact moment. Ride with dignity, the leaflet said. Expect tests. Answer none with fists. You carried those lines like a pocket prayer. When the bus braked hard and a man muttered a slur like a cough, I kept my gaze level. A woman 2 rows back hummed the low part of a hymn, not loud enough to be a challenge, just enough to cool the temperature. The driver watched, waiting for a spark that didn't come. Silence can be armor when it's chosen. Outside, you could feel money remembering, seats filled, fare boxes clicked. The bus company's ledger started warming its hands by a different fire. But the ledger remembered winter. They remembered 70,000 shoes. That tension rode with us, too. How victory and economics shook hands while trust stayed in the doorway, undecided. Not everyone walked away with the same ending. Rosa paid a price you couldn't fold into a court order. Jobs vanished. Threats multiplied. She and Raymond left for Detroit because victory doesn't pay rent when your name rings in the wrong ears. Folks like to tell tidy stories. Life prefers complicated ones. I kept a newspaper clipping of her photo in my Bible, a reminder that courage bills you in installments. As for Martin, the microphone had found him during the long year, and he hadn't flinched. Now, reporters followed his shadow, and his words traveled faster than buses ever could. But I remember the small things. Him stopping by a dispatch table to thank a teenager who'd been copying route lists, or the way he'd lower his voice when a grandmother asked if it was safe to ride. Leadership wasn't the volume. It was the temperature he set in a room. That first week back, tests came dressed as courtesy. A driver forgot to stop. A deputy rode the aisle with a look that asked for trouble. A man on the curb spat where our feet would land. We stepped around it like a puddle. Incident after incident got logged and sent to the lawyers, not to fists. The discipline we'd drilled for 381 days didn't evaporate just because a judge's ink had dried. Was it joy? Yes, in that quiet, grown-up way. Joy that doesn't jump on the furniture, joy that smooths a skirt and rests a swollen knee on the seat. It was owed from the start. I watched an elder sit by a window and name the streets like old friends. Court, Hull, Monroe, not as a claim, as a homecoming. I also watched the bus company try to act like they'd invited us. First come, first served, they said, with a smile that didn't touch their eyes. We took them at their words and held them to it. When a driver hesitated, a chorus of "We're fine right here" rose like a tide. It wasn't loud. It was unanimous. When I stepped off that day, the curb felt different under my shoes. Not softer, not higher, just honest. For a year, we'd moved a city with our feet. Now we'd moved its rules. The ride mattered, but the road we built to reach it, that's what made the seat hold. People asked if the victory was the ride. I told them the victory was the blueprint. We'd proved something simple and dangerous. When a community moves as one body, feet, phones, pulpits, paychecks, you can bend law and ledger at the same time. What held first was discipline, not the stiff kind, the practiced kind. Nonviolence as daily muscle. We learned to turn anger into assignments, fear into schedules, humiliation into humor that kept the room breathing. That carried forward. In Greensboro, kids sat down at lunch counters with the same calm we drilled in fellowship halls. They brought notebooks, not knives. They brought songs that made the air sturdy. Then came the math that made copycats brave. We'd shown that a city runs on the very people it tries to sideline. Pull that labor, those fares, that purchasing power even for a week. And you hear the pipes in the basement rattling. Nashville ran the equation at their department stores. Freedom Riders penciled it into bus terminals across state lines. You could see planners drawing our carpool charts in new places, swapping deacons for dorm captains, long sedans for borrowed station wagons, but the skeleton looked mighty familiar. Women's networks didn't just hold, they multiplied. Secretaries, teachers, beauticians with appointment books that doubled as command posts. In town after town, the voice at the end of the line was a woman who knew your aunt, your pastor, your boss's cousin, and how to keep a pot of coffee going through 3 strategy meetings. Folks remember speeches because microphones love them. Movements remember lists because lists keep you on time. We fixed a myth while we were at it. People loved to say Rosa was tired, as if fatigue had staged the boycott. The truth traveled. She was trained, principled, ready. That version spread hand to hand. Highlander workshops, NAACP chapters, living rooms where daughters watched mothers organize and saw that quiet was often competence, not consent. I told my own kids, bravery is a habit before it's a moment. What spread next was the way we told time. We stopped measuring change in headlines and started measuring it in increments you could carry. A porch to factory walk, a 10-cent fare withheld, a night of switchboard duty, a court date marked on a church bulletin. Thousands of small sacrifices add up to law the way drops make a river, slow until it isn't. That arithmetic got taught without chalk. Now, power noticed. Backlash traveled too. Council tricks, injunctions dressed up as manners, sheriffs who learned to smile while they blocked a door. But by then the trick was old, and our people had learned to read fine print with a magnifying glass borrowed from Sunday school. In sit-ins, they ordered coffee and settled in for the long pour. On freedom rides, they packed toothbrushes like passports. The blueprint included patience as luggage. We kept the human ledger because victories and prices arrived braided. Rosa's move to Detroit reminded us that winds don't cushion every landing. Carpool drivers carried arrest records into job interviews. A few marriages didn't make it through the strain, and yet humor stayed. I watched young organizers trade, bus walking jokes like baseball cards. You need that. Laughter oils the gears when courage grinds. Here's what I carried forward to my grandkids. 1. Organize first, then act. Leaders get cameras, logistics gets results. 2. Make the cost visible. Emptied buses, quiet lunch counters, still cash registers. Absence can teach louder than presence. 3. Write everything down. Names, routes, incidents, court numbers. Memory is a tool. Paper is a shield. And the piece that echoes hardest? That morning detail I promised. The missing engine sounds taught the city who powered it. Silence turned into a mirror. People who thought they were invisible watched a whole economy stumble when they stepped aside. That proof doesn't fade. When doubt creeps in later, you remember the hush and the way it made men in suits look out their windows. So, what spread? A way of moving together. A way of keeping dignity in your pocket like a bus token and spending it wisely. A way of seeing that the lines drawn to divide can be redrawn to guide. Route maps for justice, penciled, erased, inked. We didn't just win seats, we learned how to travel. And we handed the map to anyone willing to lace their shoes. When the buses started again, they sounded different. The same engines, the same seats. But underneath, you could hear something new. The hum of a people who'd learned their own power. It wasn't just about where they sat, it was about what they stood for, even when standing meant walking. Rosa's quiet no didn't echo through history because it was loud. It echoed because it was steady, because it was earned, because it reminded every generation after that change doesn't always begin with a crowd. Sometimes it begins with one person refusing to move. That morning in 1955 taught America a simple truth. The silence of the oppressed can shake the loudest machine. And if you ever forget what courage sounds like, listen for the moment when the world goes quiet, right before it begins to move again. Same porch, same hour, I'll leave the porch light on